Hey, this is Josh Veach, and welcome to the Go Shout Love podcast. If you're new to Go Shout Love, we're all about doing amazing things for amazing families with kids on rare medical journeys. This month, we're shouting love for a sweet girl named Evis. You can meet her on our website at goshout.love, where each purchase from our shop in September will go towards helping purchase a safety sleeper bed for Evis. In this episode, I had the chance to talk with Heather Avis. Heather is a wife and proud mom of 3 awesome kids. Her voice has been a major influence as an advocate for people with different abilities through her Instagram account, The Lucky Few, as well as 2 inspiring books. Stick around for a chance to win a free copy of Heather's latest book, Scoot Over and Make Some Room, as well as a Go Shout Love t-shirt. I encourage you to listen in carefully and think about how you might be challenged to scoot over and make some room for people of different abilities in your life. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking time out of your day. I know you have a super busy schedule, and it means a lot that you would take time to chat with us.
Thanks. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah.
It's an honor.
First, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, what The Lucky Few is, and how it came to be about.
Yeah, those are a lot of little questions to a big question. So I'm Heather Avis. I've been married to my husband, Josh, for 17 years. We have 3 kids. Our oldest is 11. Her name is Mason. Our middle daughter is 8. Her name is Truly. And our son is 5. His name is August. And all of our kids came to us through adoption. And our oldest and our youngest both have Down syndrome. And then I'm Caucasian, and my middle daughter is African American and Guatemalan. So we're just a diverse little group. And we started, so we run a social awareness brand called The Lucky Few with a focus on shifting narratives. So we're trying to shift specifically the Down syndrome narrative. The lucky few meaning few of us have a loved one with Down syndrome. Those of us who do are very lucky. So we're putting an asset where there used to be a deficit. We're hoping that when people get a new diagnosis, or when people meet someone for the first time with Down syndrome, through the language that we're putting into the world, through the work we're doing, through the narrative shifting work we're doing, we're hoping that people will see a Down syndrome diagnosis as a positive and not as a deficit. So that's what we do. And we run the business out of our home. I've written 2 books. I speak, and we do social media is a huge piece of what we do. We have a podcast called The Lucky Few Podcast, and we do events where we encourage other people to own their own influence and become narrative shifters for themselves. So there it is. Me in a nutshell.
You are busy.
We've got a lot going on.
A lot going on.
Yeah.
So how did you get to the point where you grew into The Lucky Few? Because the messaging and the narrative shifting that you're talking about doesn't just happen. What were some of the experiences that shaped you into that direction?
Yeah. So a lot of things that landed us where we are today, a lot of the details in the beginning was just kind of an unfolding. There wasn't a lot of intentionality behind it for us. We just found ourselves in a space that required us to respond a certain way. And that's kind of how it happened initially. So even with The Lucky Few, our Instagram handle initially was Macy Makes My Day. Our oldest daughter is Mason. We call her Macy. And I started using the hashtag The Lucky Few, and it just started to snowball, specifically in the Down syndrome community. And so then that became, before it was even, so it's the title of my first book, and before it was the name of our LLC, I even just got a tattoo on my arm that says The Lucky Few. It was my second tattoo. And so that's how that happened. It just kind of happened to us. And then a book deal kind of happened, and then Instagram just started growing. And so we really were just stepping into the unfolding that was happening in front of us. And in doing so, realizing that we had a platform and realizing people are listening to us, and recognizing and owning that we have something to say because of our life experiences. Right. And so really taking ownership. So it became an idea of stewarding. So we started at recognizing what we have in our hands and then trying to be intentional and steward it well. And that's how it became a business. And that's how the other book came to be. The second book, Scoot Over, Make Some Room. And we're just a lot more intentional in our space. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of the best movements kind of start that way. They're just kind of the next right step followed by the next right step, kind of an unfolding, like you mentioned. We're going to talk about Scoot Over and Make Some Room, your latest book. But before we do, I have to mention you reference how Macy is a Tom Petty fan in the book. And when I was reading that, it sparked, like technology is so great. We have so many music options in front of us. And so I'm like, why have I not? I need to go back and listen to some Tom Petty on Spotify.
Right?
So you can thank her on my behalf for a Tom Petty day or two on Spotify.
I love that. I know I'll remember artists from a long time ago and be like, why are we not listening to this music anymore? It's so good.
Right.
Yeah,
especially if something comes on the radio that's pretty recent, it's just not good music. And so you're
right.
So, yeah. Talking about your latest book, Scoot Over and Make Some Room, what prompted you to write that book?
Yeah, my first book, The Lucky Few, is a memoir, the story of how all three of our kids came to be. And I thought that was it. I didn't think I was going to write another book. I continued writing. I would write articles for people. I would contribute to different magazines and online spaces, and continued my own blog and Instagram social followings and accounts. And so I was actually just in the car one day and thought, oh my gosh, this is it. And it was like a year after my book came out, and I just had this idea, and it just really came from the fact that at that point I had been living with my kids for, I guess when I started the book, Macy was probably 9.5. And so therefore we had been navigating school systems, dance classes, church. So we were in the system more so. I think when your kids are little, you can just kind of be little at home. And, I was a stay-at-home mom. So that you're not dealing with schools. You're not dealing with systems as much when your kids are real little. You still are, but not as much. And so our experiences with Macy, basically because she has Down syndrome, being looked at as less than everywhere she steps. And there's an expectation on her to bend and flex and fit into a mold that society's put in place for her that she's not going to fit in. And so we had to do a lot of fighting, which I don't love that term, but it really is that, a lot of like waking up in the morning and putting on our boots and being like, all right, we're going to go make this world work for Macy, because it's for Mason, but also because it's going to work better for the rest of humanity. We really believe that, because that had been our experience. So then it was like, all right, I've got some stories. I've got something to say. And so I put it on paper.
Was there like a set moment where you realized, okay, I have to do something, and kind of triggered an advocate switch in you? Or is that something that has just kind of grown with the different experiences that you've had with your kids? Does that make sense?
Yeah. There isn't like this is when I became an advocate. Again, a lot of it I think is just a natural unfolding that's taken place. And I say this a lot, that advocacy, and I think I write this in my book too, that the advocacy as a choice is a privilege. There's the majority of us are born into the world where systems work in our favor, and the thought of having to advocate for ourselves or others, we just don't have to. So to get to choose it is a privilege. Mm-hmm. And then there are other people groups that if they want an equitable space in this world, which they do and they deserve, then they are an advocate from day one. And for me, that meant once my kids became my kids, I no longer have the privilege of choosing not to advocate. I have to be an advocate for them.
Right.
And so I have one memory where we switched schools after kindergarten. We moved to a different city, and Mason was in a first grade special day classroom. We're in California, so they have special day classrooms if you enter a school with an IEP, or if you with Down syndrome. If you are like Macy, then their first reaction is to put her in a separate classroom. That's a special ed classroom. It was a K through third, or K first, second grade classroom. And she was there, but I made it very clear that I wanted her spending as much time as possible in the general education setting, because I know that's what's going to be best for her and best for her peers. And so that looked like something called mainstreaming is kind of the term that's used. And so she was got to go to the first grade classroom during like reg time and calendar and music. And then she'd go back to the SGC classes, like this back and forth. And we started getting notes home from teachers and phone calls like Mason hid under the desk and was spitting on students and kicking the teacher. And I'm like, what? Okay. Like these behaviors that we had never seen before, ever. And so that just communicated to us. Behavior is unspoken communication. And so we just started looking at it more, and it was a moment of like, all right, we really believe, and this was through talking with some mentors in the space, but what it came down to is Macy doesn't know where she belongs, and she doesn't know how to express that she wants to belong somewhere like every other human being. And with this back and forth between these two different classrooms, she doesn't know who her people are, and she doesn't have a people. Like she's not a citizen of her school because she can't be a citizen of the classroom because she's in a segregated space. And so that began the battle of inclusive practices and full inclusion for Macy, because we knew it would be best for her. And again, would be best for the general population. So that moment in first grade was like, okay, we got some work to do here. And it took 2 years. It took us 2 years of having to convince the powers that be. And, you know, we were being as reasonable as we possibly can, obviously with a strong bias towards Macy and towards what we want.
In the book, you even reference how that was kind of a happy medium. You kind of compromised and having her in both spaces and kind of shifting back and forth, and then recognizing that it was really part of that shifting that helped, like that had her not feeling like she belonged in a specific classroom or in a community.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we do those things, when we segregate any kind of people group in any space, what we're communicating to the majority is that this person is not like you. This person doesn't deserve to be in the same space as you. So to expect the students in the general education classroom to look at Macy as a peer, as part of the community, that's unreasonable. Of course, they're not going to believe that because she's that other girl in the other class who gets to come visit. And the truth is, Mason's not a visitor in this world. Nobody with a different ability or who finds himself marginalized is a visitor, right? We are all citizens. We all deserve full citizenship. And I think that needs to be, that is in every space that we inhibit. We should be given full citizenship in those spaces. And unfortunately, so many people who have different abilities, they're just not.
Yeah. Give us an update on how things are going from the school perspective. Have they continued to improve, or is that still quite the battle?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a battle so much now as it's just a roller coaster. And in the process of getting Mason fully included in her general education classroom with the proper supports in place, I learned so much and have had incredible mentors around me who have come before me and who are experts in that space. And so, like I said, that started in first grade, and by halfway through third grade, so March of third grade, the IEP team, and this is after, I cannot tell you how many IEP meetings we've had. And I don't know if your audience knows an IEP, individualized educational plan, and people who have different abilities. It's put in place. It's actually an incredible legally binding document to help make sure that people can have an equitable space in a school setting. So the IEP team, I mean, it was so long. It was so much, but we basically got to the point where we said they agreed that she will be in the general education setting with an inclusion specialist to help modify curriculum, with a one-on-one aide, with tech support, just the supports that she needed to be able to have access and opportunity like everybody else. And then we moved. We've moved so much, and our poor kids. But we moved when Macy was going into fourth grade, and August was not yet in kindergarten, and truly our middle daughter went into second grade. And so we entered the school with this IEP, which is a legally binding document that states Mason will have an inclusion specialist and spend, I think on the IEP, it's like 80% of her day in the general education setting. And so then we just had to reintroduce a school that's never done this before.
So that IEP transfers with her to a new school?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So IEPs are legally binding. They transfer from school to school. And if the modifications, accommodations, and services are reasonable, then they should be fulfilled. So if, like, let's say that a kid has in their IEP, like equine therapy, and then you move to a city that doesn't have horses, or they're not a part of that, it's like, that's unreasonable to expect the district to pay the money for that service. But to we walked into a school that didn't have an inclusion specialist, a district that didn't have an inclusion specialist. And we said, no, Mason gets 5 hours a week of an inclusion specialist to give her access to curriculum. And so that was a battle because that's going to cost them money, but it's within reason. So then the team has to decide that is going to stay and put all the people in place. So 4th grade was a hot mess and we made it, but we had really great people working with us. And it was the first time in her educational career that I walked into a space and felt like we could really be a team. And there were the principal and her general education teacher were coming to the table saying, we've never done this before. This is really new. We don't even totally understand it, but help us understand. And once they understood, they're like, all right, let's make it happen. But it was starting from scratch. So This is a long answer to your question.
No, that's okay.
So then this year, she's in 5th grade. The principal switched schools. Her teacher switched schools. The RSP teacher, her special ed teacher, who's a resource teacher, retired. Even like her speech therapist retired. We're literally dealing with an entirely new IEP team. And then my son August started kindergarten at the same school. Same thing, new principal, new teachers. So we're starting from scratch. So it's exhausting. However, we've set the precedents what our expectations are and why. And most of the people we're working with, they get it. They're on board. Mm-hmm. They don't know what they're doing. It feels hard. There's a little bit of resistance sometimes, but for the most part, they're on board. And Macy's 5th grade teacher is incredible. And she's just said, I've been teaching 17 years. I've never had a kid with Down syndrome in my classroom. And this is an opportunity for me to learn and grow. And it's going to be great. And so her attitude is, Mason is welcome here and I'm ready to learn from her. Yeah. And that attitude is everything. It's everything.
I want to stay there for just a second. My wife is a 3rd grade teacher. And so on behalf of her and other educators that might be listening, what other characteristics, how would you describe an ideal starting relationship with an educator for them coming into that situation, being as open and listening to a parent's needs and doing their best to shape the classroom so that a child has equitable space? What does that look like?
Yeah, you know what? It really is, the foundation is, what is the posture of your heart? It's all about your posture and the foundation. And then really you can do anything from there. So as an educator, to enter into a situation where you're with an IEP or a child with significant differences in your general education classroom, if you enter that space with the posture of this child is an asset to our classroom as is, not, oh, but they can't read, oh, but they're not writing yet, oh, but how are we going to do A, B, C, and D? But entering it with this child has so much to offer our classroom, so they are an asset, and being ready and willing to learn. So being a learner in the space. If you enter with that posture, and you set that foundation in your classroom, seriously, anything can go from there. So much growth can happen from there. And so then when real hard things happen, like with Macy, so that's Macy's 5th grade teacher's attitude. And then the other day, Macy left the classroom like in the middle of an activity and stomped to the nurse's office and then refused to come back. And so that's unexpected behavior, but as we deal with it, the teacher's attitude isn't like, well, I told you this isn't going to work. It's flexible. It's like, okay, what can we do? How can we brainstorm this? I wonder what happened to trigger that. Right. I wonder how we can do better. Oh, look at how this other student now gets to get involved and build a relationship with Mason, and how that student's life is going to be so much richer and better because of this, So I believe it is so much a posture. Yeah.
On that same note, as far as recognizing a child in the classroom as an asset, how have you seen Truly grow as a sibling because of the gifts of her siblings?
Yeah, Truly, Josh and I, my husband and I, always talk about, like, we're so curious what Truly would be like if she didn't have 2 siblings with Down syndrome, and maybe she'd be exactly the same. Probably not. We'll never know, right? So Truly is, we call her our little world changer, and she is just a presence, and she knows what she wants, and she will get what she wants. And I really believe that growing up with her sister and brother is giving her a lens to see that what she wants is actually outside, can actually be outside of herself. She doesn't just want for selfish reasons. She wants things because it's going to be good for her sister and brother and her and the world as things happen. So, I mean, I am sure her life is radically different because she has two siblings with Down syndrome, but she's only 8, and this is just our normal. So it's a hard question to answer because it's like, I don't know. This morning she was really sassy because she didn't want to get ready for school, and maybe she was, I don't know, extra compassionate. I don't want to label her with the cliches. Like, well, she's going to be more caring about people and more compassionate, and
sure.
But I think that's also true. I actually don't know.
Right.
We'll see. Yeah, and I mean, on that note too, I just thought of this. Something we talk about in our home is that we're all different, and different is awesome. We're real big on embracing our differences. And so truly, from very little, I remember when she was about 3, maybe 4, we were at church and we passed a man who had a wine stain mark on his face, like a birthmark. So half his face had that purple wine stain on it. And she's 4. And so she looks at him and points and goes, "Mom, what's wrong with that man's face?" And we're just passing. And because of the foundation we've laid, because her sisters are different, because she's different, within our home,
right?
I can go, "Oh yeah, that's something that's different about him. Remember how awesome different is?" She'd be like, "Oh yeah," and then we move on.
Yeah.
So she's real good when she's around people who are different. Like she's not freaked out by meeting a person with limb differences or with oxygen or in a wheelchair at all. She's like, "Oh yeah, they're different. They're human.
What's their awesome?" Yeah.
Yeah, and that's And as I'm processing this out loud with you in this interview, what an incredible quality for someone to get to have. Like that is the thing that we should all be striving for. And
Absolutely.
She's got it in her little 8-year-old self.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you tell parents who are kind of fresh in the fight for their child's rights? Whether it's tips or more from an emotional standpoint, however you would want to answer that.
Yeah. The best advice I've been given is so simple, and I remind myself all the time, and it's trust your gut. You know your kid best. And so whether it's with a medical professional or an educator or extracurricular, like what does your gut say about what your child needs and deserves? And that you've got it, like as a parent, as an advocate, you've got it. And you can do this, and you already are doing it, and you're more than enough, as is your child. I feel like we're stepping into spaces constantly where it's being whispered in our ear that our kid isn't enough, that they have to change in some kind of regard. And even with a lot of us in this community, Down syndrome or not, just having a child with differences like this, we're doing occupational therapy and physical therapy and speech therapy and lots of different doctors and all these different things that we do so that our child can be what? Like I had to ask myself that. Am I doing all these therapies so that my child is more typical? And I think that can be some people's goals, and I'm going to let people do what they're going to do. But I think that once I realized that, I'm going to do this so that my kid is their best version of themselves and can have the most access and opportunities in this world, then I'm going to keep celebrating who they are. So like to the parents, celebrate who your kid is, and just remember like exactly how your kid is, they are enough. Exactly how you are enough. And tomorrow's a new day, right? We're going to get knocked down 100 times. So then be knocked down. Hard is just hard. Hard is not bad. And then tomorrow wake up and have a new day, and you've got this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a completely different shift when you're thinking of as you were mentioning, the therapies and kind of helping your child become the best version of themselves versus trying to obtain certain things so that they can fit in a different setting or be more like another child. That's really, really helpful. The title of your book is Scoot Over and Make Some Room, Creating a Space Where Everyone Belongs. I love that. And if it's okay, I just want to read a section from the beginning.
Sure.
I believe everyone has a story that needs to be told and should be heard. I believe the power of story has the potential to break down barriers and create a space for people who don't yet have a seat at the table. I believe story and relationship together have the power to open our hearts to whomever the other might be in our lives, and ultimately to bring about the peace and unity our world is lacking today. We don't have to agree with one another, but we must take time to listen to one another. We're going to link to the book in the show notes, and hopefully we'll have people that'll engage with the full book because it's great. What I love about it is that it goes beyond just talking about your lens is specific to Down syndrome, but it talks even broader than that. Just the idea of everyone having value and having a place in the world. And I love the language of having a seat at the table and encouraging all of us to scoot over. From the standpoint of a parent of a neurotypical and physically typical child that says, how can I, even though I'm not naturally put in that environment, to have to think as an advocate, how can I proactively be one who is an active listener to those who don't have a voice and help become a voice for them and with them? What does that look like? What kind of action steps would you recommend?
The part that's tricky about this question is, and people will ask me, like, how do I find people with different abilities? You know, like where do I go? I don't know. Like I don't live in your city. I just don't know. So let's just put that on the table that we recognize that. But if you've got a school age child, there's chances that at your school, there's a classroom where kids have differences. And there's a really good chance if you live in the United States that they're segregated in a special classroom. And so becoming an advocate, choosing to be an advocate for those kids, that can look simple, like, hey, talking to the principal, setting up a meeting and saying, hey, I noticed that there's a whole separate classroom of kids who have different abilities and my child never interacts with them. I would love to do something because I know my kid will be better off learning alongside their peers who are different. How can we set up some more inclusive practices in our school? Or I have an idea. I'd love to start this lunch group or whatever. It really takes what seems like super boldness in the year of 2019 when we're all just behind screens interacting with each other. But like, open your eyes and be aware of who the mom or dad or caregiver is, dropping a kid off who is different, introducing yourself and saying, hey, I would love for our kids to get together sometime. Here's my phone number, or can I get your email address or something, you know? And then be proactive as a parent. If you look at things in your home, like your books and the shows you watch and the toys your kids play with, are they all looking like your kid? Those are easy. That's easy. Go on Amazon today and do a good search and you'll find plenty of books about where the hero of the story has some kind of a difference, or the hero of the story is a person of color or in a wheelchair, whatever it might be. That once your kid's exposed to that at a young age in a very normal way, that they're just immersed in it, then when they see the kid who's different or in a wheelchair or on oxygen or with Down syndrome or responding to the world differently, they have those tools because they already know the character in the book who is a hero because they are how they are, you know. The shows that your kids watch, those are super easy tools that you can start like from whenever you start exposing your kid to those things. Yeah. And then making sure, this is so huge, friends, that your posture going into it, I like the word posture, is that you are not training your kid to be a hero. So you might be familiar with this, or listeners might be. I'll get messages all the time about that Facebook video that went viral because the football player invited the kid with Down syndrome to homecoming, and the football player is the hero, right? Like, isn't this sweet and amazing? It's like, well, actually, it's like, that's great. And I'm glad that happened. But to make him a hero because he invited someone with differences to homecoming, it's actually making our community, it's actually a deficit to our community, right? Like it's feeding into that false narrative that you are better and heroic if you are able-bodied and neurotypical, and if you have differences and special needs, then you are less than and you should be pitied and you are a project. So when you're raising your kids up, reminding them that you are not a hero for being friends with someone who has a different ability. If they're given like a token at school, last year they were giving out these little bear paws, and it's like these two little girls got a bear paw or whatever animal, a reward for walking Mason to the gate. And I had to address that. Like, no. We're not raising our kids up to think they're heroes for doing a normal kind thing just because she has Down syndrome. Like, would you have given it to them if they walked the kid without Down syndrome to the gate? So just checking yourself constantly,
right.
Making sure that your kids understand, that they understand that.
Yeah. So, kind of kindness and authenticity being the baseline, not like the something that you're doing because someone else is watching. You're doing it because it's simply the right thing to do.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to that idea, like the deficit versus an asset.
Right.
So if you see Down syndrome as a deficit, then you're going to be rewarded for being with that person. But if you see Down syndrome as an asset, then you're lucky that you get to learn from and be in a relationship with that person.
Right. We've talked a lot about the school space, and in your book, you even talk a lot about the church space. Are there certain cultures or certain parts of our culture and places that you kind of see as repeat offenders, or areas that need the most improvement, or people who have influence in those spaces to really take the lead in helping bring, making those spaces more inclusive? Are there any spaces that really stand out to you?
Yeah. I mean, school systems, it really is any kind of system that's built around a collective group of people. Those systems are built for a certain kind of person.
Innately.
And it makes sense. Yeah, innately. And of course that they are, right? It's that the systems work because they work for the majority. So all those different systems built that way have a lot of work to do. I feel real strongly in the church space, because that's the space that we're in, that if anyone is doing inclusion well, if anyone is creating a welcoming environment for people who are different and bending and flexing and doing the hard work to make sure that one person feels totally valued and worthy and included in a space, it should be the church.
Right.
But you'll walk into a lot of churches that have separate programs for kids. I just got a message last week from a family who just heard from their pastor and basically said, your family isn't welcome here anymore because your kid is too hard. I mean, that kind of stuff is like, dear church, you should know better, and you should be leading the way here.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is a faith-based podcast, but we could talk about that on another interview. I've written about that. I've talked about it. I've got links. I can give you links for an article I've written about that. So,
yeah. Do you find that in the majority, and maybe it's from either your experience or people that you've heard, I mean, that outcome sounds really awful. I've been in the church space long enough to know that a lot of times it's people, and not that this gives an excuse, but it's a lot of people giving their best, and a lot of the times those people are volunteers, or they're overworked, or they're doing their best with minimal resources. Do you find that the response is often, I'm sorry, we didn't know, how can we improve and help us get better? Or is it often, specifically in the church, the situation or an outcome like you just mentioned, where they basically say, I'm sorry, we can't do that?
It's a bit of both. It really is. I mean, there's some churches doing awesome stuff, and we've actually, since we've had kids, only been in churches that are saying, I'm so sorry this happened, how can we do better, and are really working towards doing better. Mm-hmm. It really is all over the board. And yeah, our experiences have been so different. And like I've heard from other families, it's like Sunday morning, there's just not a place for them to go, or they're there and then they drop their kid off and they can't handle their kid. And so they're just walking around outside, with their kid while the other spouse is in the service.
Right.
And there's that piece, but there's also the piece of, like, if you look around your church congregation or a church body, and there aren't people with different abilities in your church, then for sure you are missing out on the fullness of who God is. And that's a problem. And it's a problem that I see trickling into our society. And so if, like, I had heard once when I was spoken at an event, and I was talking to the pastor beforehand, and he was saying how if you have total silence throughout a church service, then you're missing a population, right? Like there are people who in the middle of service maybe are going to respond differently, or talk out loud, or be making groaning sounds, or whatever it might be, because that's how they are all the time. So if you're not hearing those noises in your church service, that's a problem.
And that was from a pastor.
Yeah.
We need more of those, don't we?
I know. Well, it was a pastor who invited me to do a training with his whole staff. So yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So yeah, there's lots of room and opportunities for growth.
Yeah. As we wrap up, I want to ask a little bit more of a personal question. how have you and Josh are busy. You have, you're managing this platform that you said you've been given and trying to do the most good with it. How, and the social media world is incredibly beautiful and can also be really ugly. And so I'm wondering, I'm sure you've experienced both ends of that spectrum, and I'm wondering how you have handled that. How have you navigated the social media channels and stayed positive and continued the work that you're doing with, some of the ugly that comes with it?
Yeah. It is so true. It is so hard. And the ugly and the beauty are also internally. Like, it brings out ugly in me. The ugly parts of my heart, social media will bring to the surface faster than any other thing I do. Seriously. So we navigate it with open hands. We're not holding it very tightly. And I think what I have going for me is I am an external processor, and I'm like real transparent, I think sometimes to a fault. Mm-hmm. So I'm always bringing things to the surface. Like, so I'll see something that triggers me and I'll just talk to Josh about it. And then he'll talk me down off a ledge. and it is what it is for us is to keep the ugly at bay, is just checking ourselves constantly, like being real honest about where our hearts are and why we're doing what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And then when something comes at us that makes us respond in a way that we know doesn't align with our heart and doesn't align with our mission, then we can address that because we've been real clear. Like, this is why we're doing social media. This is what it's about for us. And so if I'm going to start feeling real jealous and comparing what I'm doing to somebody else, I am preaching that message constantly. Stop comparing yourself, mm-hmm. And then I find myself comparing, and it like gets me into a tailspin. And so, but I can check myself because I've been real honest with myself about what we're about, mm-hmm. and what we're trying to accomplish. But it's a mental game for me, for sure. And in terms of like people responding in an ugly way on social, we just haven't had that very much in our space. I think right now what I'm seeing creep up a little bit more is this competitive idea within our community, within the Down syndrome community. People don't realize it's happening, but as the space becomes more saturated, I think that there's more people who see scarcity in it,
right?
And I think that scarcity idea in the social media space, the idea of scarcity can be incredibly divisive within a community.
Yeah.
So those are things I see happening in the social media space. But there's such good stuff, like companies reaching out to us, big companies, brands that people know about, like Old Navy or something, saying, hey, we're celebrating our birthday and our theme is celebrating differences, and we'd love for you guys to help us out in that campaign. Like, that's rad. And it's great that we live in a day and age where I can be paid for that.
Right.
Which next week that may end. It's also like the Wild West
right.
in Instagram. Yeah. It really is. Everything's constantly changing. So then I know that brands are seeing what our family looks like physically as something that needs to be represented. We're very underrepresented. Our family makeup, all three of our children are very underrepresented in all those spaces. So it's a cool opportunity for other brands and spaces to say, hey, we see you guys and we want you represented because we want to, quote, normalize differences.
Right.
Yeah.
Do they, in those sort of scenarios, do they allow you to help shape the messaging and really take your feedback, or is it more photo shoot type up and then they kind of add the messaging themselves?
Well, anytime we work with the brand, they're sending us what their messaging is and asking us if we want to do it. And so we can say yes or no.
Gotcha.
And so if it works within us with what we want, then we'll go for it. And almost always they want our unique take on it. Mm-hmm. So they'll give us a theme, and then they want us to give it our wording and our messaging within the theme that they've given. Yeah.
So that allows you to actually be a part of the messaging instead of just be the face of it.
Totally. Yeah. And we'll have, it hasn't happened that much with us. It happens with a lot of our friends. It's happened to them in the same space, but like people, they're like, you're such a sellout, and how could you put your kids out there like that or whatever, like make money off your family? Like, you can feel that way and think that way. That's fine. But there's so many things happening here. And one is that these major brands are seeing the importance in a family like ours and that we're underrepresented and they want us in the space. So the shift that's going to happen within the narrative, if we say yes to this opportunity, is great. And also people following us on Instagram aren't paying us to do this work. So,
right.
So then we can also get paid and keep doing it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much. I know you have a lot going on. I want to be really respectful of your time, but thank you so much for carving out a little bit of time to talk with our audience and to share your story. Thank you for your book, and the honesty that's in it, the messaging is, and the encouragement to be open-minded about how each of us walking through our day-to-day lives can help bridge the gap of equality, really, and equity for each person around us. And I think it, like you mentioned, it starts with even recognizing some of that privilege we don't even see that we have, simply because we haven't had to walk a different path. And so thank you for your words. Thank you for the work that you and Josh are doing and for sharing your awesome kids with the world. And so where can, if people aren't already connected with you, where can they follow your story?
Yeah, before I said, thank you guys for having me on and for the work you're doing. The work you're doing is so important, and I am thankful that your company is out there in the world, and you're not getting enough credit for what you're doing.
Well, thank you.
So really appreciate it. And you guys are such narrative shifters. I love it. So we are on Instagram, The Lucky Few Official, and the podcast I do is luckyfewpodcast.com, or on social, The Lucky Few Pod, and then heatheravis.com will lead you to all of the things. Yeah.
All of the things where you can connect.
All the things. Yep.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Heather. The conversation and reading her book challenged me in a lot of ways. Be sure to connect with her at heatheravis.com. And if you're interested in buying her latest book, check the link in our show notes. Or if you'd like a shot at a free copy of her book, you can leave a review of the Go Shout Love podcast at your favorite place to listen. And then simply send us a screenshot of that review into our DMs on social media. We're at Go Shout Love, and you'll be entered to win a copy of her latest book, as well as a free Go Shout Love t-shirt. If you haven't already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the Go Shout Love podcast so you don't miss out on any future conversations. Thanks for listening in and joining us in the mission to shout love for kids on rare medical journeys.